Welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. I figured I'd give it a shot. My friends kept raving about this new app called Hinge, claiming it was different from all the others. They said it was all about meaningful connections and not just swiping left or right based on a picture. So, there I was, scrolling through profiles, trying to find someone who didn't look like a total creep or worse, a catfish. It was a rainy evening when I matched with someone named Jake. His profile was intriguing. He had this rugged charm, with a scruffy beard and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hint at a deeper story. His bio was filled with quirky humor and a love for adventure, saying he was into hiking and ghost tours. Honestly, I was sold. I sent him a message, and to my surprise, he responded almost instantly. We chatted back and forth, and it felt easy, like we were already friends. After a couple of days of texting, Jake suggested we meet up. He proposed a coffee shop in my neighborhood, but I hesitated. I had heard stories of first dates gone wrong, the kind of stories that made your stomach churn and kept you up at night. But I felt a strange pull toward him, like an invisible string tying us together. I agreed, and we set a time for the following Friday. The day of the date, I dressed carefully, wanting to look nice but also comfortable. I chose a simple sweater and jeans, something that felt me. As I walked to the coffee shop, the wind was biting, and the clouds hung low, threatening rain. I felt that familiar mix of excitement and anxiety bubbling in my stomach. What if he didn't look like his pictures? What if we had nothing to talk about? When I walked into the shop, the warmth enveloped me, but my heart sank a little as I scanned the room. He wasn't there yet. I ordered a chai latte and found a small table in the corner, trying to calm my nerves. The minutes ticked by like hours, and just as I began to entertain thoughts of bailing, I saw him walk in. Jake was even more handsome in person, and my heart did a little flip. He waved and headed toward me, and I couldn't help but smile. We got to talking, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was charming and funny, with stories that made me laugh out loud. We lost track of time, and before I knew it, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the coffee shop bathed in a warm glow. As we were wrapping up, Jake suggested we go for a walk. I hesitated for a moment, glancing at the darkening street outside, but I felt that same pull. It was almost magnetic. So, off we went, strolling down the slick pavement, the street lamps flickering as the wind picked up, rustling the trees. The atmosphere was eerie, but in an exciting way. We walked until we reached an old park, one I hadn't visited in years. The playground, with its rusted swings and faded slides, felt haunted by childhood memories. Jake suggested we sit on a bench and talk some more. As we settled in, I felt a strange sensation creeping up my spine. The shadows seemed to lengthen, and the laughter of children from earlier felt distant and ghostly now. I shook it off, trying to focus on Jake's stories, but there was something about the place that gave me the chills. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper as he told me about a ghost tour he had taken. The way he described it made my skin prickle. He spoke of cold spots and disembodied voices, and I couldn't help but feel like he was trying to pull me into his world of the macabre. I chuckled nervously, but deep down, I was captivated. Just as he reached the climax of his story, a loud rustling interrupted us. I turned, my heart racing, but it was just a raccoon rummaging through the trash nearby. I laughed it off, but Jake's expression had changed. He was staring into the darkness, his face pale. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual. "Are you okay?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. He blinked, shaking his head as if coming back to reality. "Yeah, just thought I saw something." He forced a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The conversation shifted, but the tension lingered. I tried to brush it off, but the unease settled in my stomach like a rock. The shadows around us felt alive, and I was hyper-aware of every sound, the creaking of the trees, distant traffic, and the rustle of leaves. We decided to head back, and as we walked, Jake seemed distracted. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if he felt the weight of someone, or something, watching us. I tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes and sharing stories, but he was lost in his thoughts. When we reached the coffee shop, I felt a rush of relief. It was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the chilling darkness outside. I suggested we grab one last drink, but Jake hesitated. He looked almost pained. "I think I should go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have some things to take care of." Confused, I nodded, feeling the disappointment wash over me. He walked me to my car, and as I turned to say goodbye, a shiver ran down my spine. He looked different, his eyes dark and distant, as if he were battling something within himself. I drove home, replaying the evening in my mind, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The spark that had been there earlier had fizzled out, replaced by an unsettling feeling that I couldn't shake. Later that night, I received a message from Jake. "I'm sorry about tonight. I didn't mean to be so weird. Can we try again?" I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Something didn't sit right with me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a feeling of dread washed over me. I decided to ignore the message and went to bed, hoping a good night's sleep would help clear my mind. The following morning, I woke to a flurry of notifications on my phone. My heart sank as I opened the news app. The headline read, "Local man found dead in park, suspected foul play." I felt the blood drain from my face as I read the article. It described a man found in the very park where Jake and I had walked the night before. The police were investigating, but the details were sketchy. My mind raced. Was it Jake? My gut twisted in knots. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread as I replayed the evening's events. Had he known something? Was that why he seemed so off? As I sat there, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Jake, sent just moments ago. "Hey, I know this sounds crazy, but I need to see you again. I can't explain everything, but please trust me." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, confusion flooding my mind. How was he texting me if he was dead? The air in the room felt thick, and I suddenly felt cold, as if a chill had settled in my bones. I glanced out the window, the dark cloud swirling above, and in that moment I realized, sometimes the things we think we understand are just shadows, hiding the truth. I had always been a bit of a loner, the kind of person who preferred the warm glow of my computer screen to the chatter of a crowded bar. So when I finally decided to dip my toes into the world of online dating, I figured it would be a simple way to get out of my comfort zone. I signed up for this Hinge dating app, thinking it was just another harmless way to meet new people. At first, everything seemed pretty normal. I matched with a few people, had some light conversations, and even went on a couple of coffee dates. But then I came across Jenna. Her profile was captivating, beautiful eyes and a smile that seemed to reach out of the screen. We started chatting, and I was instantly drawn to her. She had this way of making every conversation feel deep and meaningful, and I found myself sharing things I had never told anyone before. As we texted back and forth, Jenna began to share some of her interests. She was into horror movies and true crime podcasts, and I felt like we clicked on a level that was rare for me. A few days in, she suggested we meet up at this old, creepy diner on the outskirts of town. The place had been around forever, and it was known for its eerie atmosphere, faded photographs on the walls, a jukebox that played songs from a bygone era, and dim lighting that made everything feel just a little off. But the thrill of meeting Jenna overshadowed any anxiety I felt about the setting. The night of our date, I drove through winding back roads, the trees looming over me like a dark tunnel. The diner was just as I had imagined, its neon sign flickering unsteadily, casting shadows that danced on the cracked pavement. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt thick and heavy. I spotted Jenna sitting in a booth at the far end, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a single light bulb hanging above her. She looked even better in person, and I felt a rush of excitement as I walked toward her. We talked for hours, sharing stories and laughing until our sides hurt. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something unsettling. Jenna would occasionally glance at the door, her expression shifting from joy to unease, as if she were waiting for something or someone. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. As we left the diner, the chill of the night air wrapped around us. I walked Jenna to her car, and she hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. I could tell she was struggling with something, but before I could ask, she quickly brushed it off and invited me to join her for a late-night drive. I agreed, not wanting to let the moment slip away. As we cruised through the empty streets, Jenna shared her fascination with urban legends and unsolved mysteries. The further we drove, the more she opened up, revealing darker stories from her past. Her words painted vivid images in my mind, and I felt like I was drawn into her world. But then she mentioned a particular story about a couple who went missing in the woods nearby. The way she described it sent a chill down my spine. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked, her voice suddenly low and serious. I chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off, but there was something about her tone that made me uneasy. The air in the car grew thick with tension as she continued, recounting how many believed the couple's spirits still roamed those woods, searching for something they could never find. I felt my heart race, and I couldn't tell if it was from fear or from the thrill of being with her. Eventually, she pulled off the road and parked in front of an old, rusted gate that led into the woods. I wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but the excitement in her eyes was contagious. She grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and insisted we explore. I hesitated for just a moment, but her enthusiasm was hard to resist. As we walked deeper into the woods, the shadows grew longer, and the sounds of the night enveloped us. The crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant hoot of an owl created a haunting symphony. Jenna led the way, her flashlight bobbing around like a beacon, illuminating the twisted branches and gnarled roots that surrounded us. We stumbled upon an old cabin, its wooden walls rotting and covered in moss. Jenna's eyes sparkled with intrigue as we approached, and she pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. The inside was dark, the air musty, and I could feel a strange energy buzzing around us. As we explored the cabin, Jenna's demeanor shifted again. She became distant, her focus shifting to the walls as if she could see something I couldn't. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The shadows seemed to stretch and bend, dancing just out of the reach of our flashlights. Suddenly, Jenna turned to me, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of excitement and fear. She whispered about a legend she had heard, how the spirits of the couple would appear to those who dared to enter the cabin, seeking help to find their way home. My heart raced as I started to question what I had gotten myself into. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the cabin, and I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. Jenna's expression shifted from excitement to sheer terror. She grabbed my arm, urging me to leave. We stumbled out of the cabin, rushing back into the woods. As we sprinted toward the car, I could hear the sound of footsteps behind us, quickening with every step we took. I glanced back, and for a split second, I thought I saw figures flitting between the trees. My breath came in ragged gasps, panic coursing through me. We finally reached the car, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. Jenna was breathing heavily, her face pale as she looked back into the woods. Just as I turned the key in the ignition, I saw a shadow dart past the tree line. It felt like something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. We sped off, the darkness swallowing the cabin behind us. But as we drove, Jenna remained silent, her face turned toward the window. I could feel the tension between us, thick and suffocating. I stole glances at her, trying to understand what was happening. When we finally reached the diner, I pulled into the parking lot, still shaken by the night's events. Jenna sat quietly, staring ahead, lost in thought. I didn't know what to say, how to ease the tension. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. I know it was intense. Her words hung in the air, and I felt an unexpected rush of empathy. I wanted to reach out, comfort her, but I hesitated. Something felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into a nightmare. As I leaned closer, trying to make sense of it all, Jenna suddenly smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You know, I was just thinking about those spirits," she said, her voice taking on a strange tone. They say they're always looking for someone to join them. I felt a chill run down my spine as the realization hit me. The story she had told, the way she had drawn me into her world, it was all a game to her. The excitement, the fear, it was all part of a twisted narrative she had crafted. Before I could respond, she reached over and touched my arm, her grip tightening. "You were perfect for this," she said, her smile widening unnaturally. "I've been waiting for someone like you." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy fog. I had been lured into her web, and I could feel the darkness closing in around me. As I stared into her eyes, I realized that I wasn't just dealing with a girl who loved horror stories. I had unwittingly stepped into a real-life nightmare, and the shadows that lurked in the woods weren't the only ones I had to fear. I had just moved to a new city for college, and like any 20-something, I was eager to meet new people. My roommate suggested trying out a dating app called Hinge. I wasn't too keen on the idea. Swiping through profiles felt so superficial, but I figured, why not? I was curious to see who was out there. So, after a few awkward selfies and some half-hearted prompts, I set up my profile. A few days in, my phone buzzed with notifications. I had some matches, but one stood out. His name was Ethan, and his profile was intriguing. He had this intense gaze in his pictures, and his prompts revealed a love for horror movies and late-night philosophical conversations. I found myself drawn in, reading his responses over and over. He had a way of writing that felt both deep and playful at the same time. It was refreshing, especially compared to the usual small talk on dating apps. We started chatting, and the conversations flowed easily. There was something magnetic about him. I felt like I could share anything, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of texting, we decided to meet up for coffee at this quirky little cafe tucked away in an old neighborhood. It had a vintage charm, with mismatched furniture and flickering fairy lights that gave the place a cozy yet eerie atmosphere. When I walked in, I spotted Ethan sitting at a corner table, his dark hair slightly tousled, his intense eyes scanning the room. I felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nerves as I approached him. He greeted me with a warm smile that instantly put me at ease. As we talked, I felt a connection that was hard to describe. We shared stories, laughed at the same jokes, and even ended up discussing our favorite horror films. But as the night wore on, I began to notice something unsettling. Ethan had this way of looking at me, like he was dissecting every word I said, analyzing me. At first, I thought I was just overthinking it. Maybe he was simply an intense guy. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something lurking beneath the surface. After that first date, we saw each other more frequently. Each time, the connection deepened, but so did my unease. One evening, while we were watching a classic horror film at his apartment, I noticed a peculiar collection of old photographs on the walls. They were black and white, depicting various people in different settings. At first glance, they seemed harmless, but upon closer inspection, I realized that some of them looked eerily similar to me. I brushed it off as a coincidence, but the feeling of discomfort lingered. I started noticing other things too. Ethan had this odd habit of asking me about my childhood, my fears, and my dreams. It felt like he was cataloging every detail of my life. I tried to push the thoughts aside, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. As time passed, Ethan began sharing more about his past. He would tell these chilling stories about his upbringing, filled with strange occurrences and unsettling family dynamics. I thought he was just trying to impress me with his flair for the dramatic, but something about the way he spoke made my skin crawl. One night, after returning from a late dinner, I was scrolling through my phone when I stumbled upon a news article from a few years back. It detailed a series of disappearances in the city, all linked to a man who matched Ethan's description. My heart raced as I read the chilling details, how the victims had all been young women who had last been seen with a man resembling him. I was torn between disbelief and fear. Could Ethan really be connected to something so dark? I felt like I was in a horror movie, where the protagonist slowly uncovers the truth about the person they were falling for. I decided to confront him, but each time I tried to bring it up, my courage faltered. I didn't want to believe that the person I had started to care for could be hiding something so sinister. The tension grew, and so did my paranoia. I found myself checking my surroundings more often, feeling like I was being watched. I started avoiding late-night meetups and began ghosting him, hoping that would send a message. But he wouldn't let me slip away that easily. He sent text after text, asking if everything was okay, if I wanted to talk. One night, I finally decided to come clean. I invited him over, determined to confront him about my suspicions. I paced my apartment, heart pounding, waiting for him to arrive. When the doorbell rang, I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. He walked in, his expression a mix of concern and confusion. I took a deep breath and blurted out my fears, telling him about the article, the disappearances, and how his stories made me uneasy. I expected anger, denial, anything but the calm demeanor he displayed. He listened, nodding slowly, and then he smiled in a way that sent chills down my spine. Instead of denying it, he leaned in closer, his voice low and steady. He started to explain how he had always felt misunderstood, how his fascination with horror and the macabre had been a way to cope with a chaotic upbringing. But then he shifted the conversation, mentioning how he had always wanted to create something, to document life in a way that felt true. I felt a pit in my stomach as he revealed that he had been working on a project, a film that would capture real-life horror stories. I thought he was joking at first until he pulled out a camera from his bag. Ethan explained that he wanted to document our relationship, to capture the rawness of emotions and fears. It turned into a twisted confession, where he claimed to have seen beauty in the darkness. Everything clicked into place then. The photos, the intense scrutiny, the stories. I was horrified, realizing that I had unknowingly become part of his project, a living piece of art for his sick vision. I tried to back away, but he stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a fervor that felt more like obsession than creativity. In a bid to escape, I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm, his grip firm and unyielding. Panic surged through me, and I managed to break free, darting toward the door. I could hear him calling after me, but I didn't stop. I ran down the dimly lit hallway, my heart racing, feeling as if I had just escaped a horror film. I bolted into the night, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I glanced back, half expecting to see him chasing after me. But he was nowhere in sight. I reached my apartment, slamming the door behind me, locking it tight. I stood there, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. Days turned into weeks, and I didn't hear from Ethan again. I was relieved, but the unease never truly left. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of having someone lurking in the shadows. Then, one evening, I decided to check my social media. That's when I saw it, a post from Ethan, a photo of me, taken at the cafe where we first met, with the caption, "Sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones we write ourselves." My heart dropped. It felt like a warning, a twisted reminder that I was still part of his narrative. I quickly deleted the app, but the feeling of dread lingered. I couldn't escape him, or the horror he had woven into my life. As I lay in bed that night, the shadows creeping around my room felt more alive than ever. I realized that sometimes the monsters we fear aren't lurking under the bed or hiding in the closet. They're the ones we let into our lives, the ones who seem charming at first, but turn out to be something entirely different. In the end, I was left questioning everything. Did I really know him at all? Or was he just a figment of my own imagination, a character in a story that only he was writing? The line between reality and horror blurred, and I was left wondering if I'd ever truly escaped the grip of his chilling narrative. It started on a rainy Friday night, the kind of night where the world outside feels like a different planet, drenched in shadows and the echo of raindrops against window panes. I was curled up in my small apartment, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the nagging feeling of loneliness that had been creeping in lately. That's when I stumbled upon the dating app, Hinge. It promised connections, something more meaningful than the mindless swiping of other apps. I thought, why not give it a shot? I created a profile, picked out a few decent photos, and crafted a bio that felt honest yet intriguing. The notifications started coming in, and soon I was chatting with a guy named Adam. He seemed cool, passionate about music, and had this quirky sense of humor that made me laugh. After a week of texting, he asked if I wanted to meet up. I was nervous but excited. It felt like I was finally stepping out of my comfort zone. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop downtown, a cozy place with warm lighting and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. When I arrived, my heart raced as I scanned the room for him. There he was, sitting by the window, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. He was even cuter in person, with messy hair and a casual vibe. We chatted, laughed, and time seemed to fly. As we finished our drinks, he suggested taking a walk through a nearby park. The park was beautiful, illuminated by scattered streetlights that created pools of warm light amidst the surrounding darkness. As we strolled, I felt a connection growing, a sense of ease that I hadn't expected. But as we wandered deeper into the park, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling quiet. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers against the night sky. I shrugged off the anxiety creeping in. It was just my imagination playing tricks on me. That's when Adam suggested we sit on a bench to talk. I hesitated but agreed. As we sat, he began sharing stories about his life. But something felt off. He spoke with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I found myself leaning away unconsciously as he recounted tales of heartbreak and loss, his eyes darkening with every word. I tried to engage, but my thoughts drifted to the shadows around us, the way they seemed to pulse with an energy that made me uncomfortable. I excused myself to go to the restroom, needing a moment to compose myself. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I hurried back, but when I returned, Adam was gone. My heart sank. Had I imagined the whole thing? I looked around, but the park felt emptier than before. I decided to leave, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. The next few days were filled with confusing emotions. I replayed our date in my head, trying to make sense of the sudden shift. I decided to message Adam, hoping for some clarity. He responded quickly, charming as ever, suggesting we meet again. Part of me was reluctant, but curiosity won out, and I agreed. We decided to meet at my apartment instead, a more intimate setting that felt safer. When the day came, I cleaned my place obsessively, trying to create a welcoming atmosphere. As the clock ticked closer to his arrival, I felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with anxiety. When he knocked on the door, my heart raced again. I opened it, and there he was, holding a small bouquet of flowers. They were beautiful, but I couldn't help but notice the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. We settled on the couch. The conversation flowed easily at first, but soon it took a turn. Adam began talking about his past relationships, but it was darker this time. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, sharing tales of betrayal and revenge. I felt the walls closing in, the air thickening with tension. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he seemed fixated, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. As the night wore on, I felt increasingly trapped in the small space. My instincts screamed at me to get out. I excused myself to grab a drink from the kitchen, desperate for a moment to breathe. As I poured water into a glass, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection. I looked pale, wide-eyed, and it struck me. What was I doing? Why was I still entertaining this? When I returned, I found Adam standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. I could feel his tension radiating through the room. I tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but he turned to me, his expression darkening. The air shifted, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, and I could see something shift in his eyes, a predatory glint that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I took a step back, my heart racing. I needed to get out, to put distance between us. I made an excuse about needing to check my phone and slipped into the hallway. My mind raced. What if I was overreacting? What if he was just a guy who had some issues? But the unsettling feeling in my gut told me otherwise. Suddenly, I heard a noise from the living room, a crash, followed by silence. Panic surged as I dashed back inside, but the room was empty. The flowers he had brought lay scattered on the floor, petals torn, as if in a frenzy. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, searching for any sign of him. It was too quiet, and every shadow felt alive, watching me. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling, ready to call for help. But just as I reached for it, the front door creaked open, and there he stood again, a strange smile plastered on his face. He held something in his hand, a small knife, glinting under the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. He stepped inside, his demeanor shifting from charming to menacing in a heartbeat. I backed away slowly, my mind racing for an escape plan. I could see it in his eyes, the calm before the storm. He spoke in a low voice, but I couldn't hear him over the pounding of my heart. I turned and bolted for the back door, adrenaline surging through my veins. As I burst into the alley behind my apartment, the cold air hit me like a slap in the face. I didn't look back. I ran, my feet pounding against the pavement, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. I could hear him behind me, but I didn't dare turn around. My mind screamed for me to keep going, to escape the nightmare that had unfolded in my living room. I finally reached the street, gasping for breath, my heart racing. I glanced back, half expecting to see him right behind me, but the alley was empty. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. How had it escalated so quickly? Days passed, and I tried to put the pieces together. I deleted the app, convinced that it was a terrible mistake, but the memories haunted me, especially the way Adam had looked at me, as if he had been playing a game all along. The thrill of connection had turned into a nightmare, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far worse. Then came the twist. It was a week later when I received a notification on my phone. A message from Adam had popped up, a simple text that read, "I'm sorry you felt scared. I just wanted to show you my true self." My heart dropped as I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of dread settle in my stomach. It was a reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear are not lurking in the shadows, but are hiding in plain sight, disguised as someone we thought we knew. I found myself swiping through a dating app one rainy night. The flickering light from my phone illuminated the dim corners of my room, casting shadows that danced eerily across the walls. It felt like I was opening a door to something unknown. The name of the app didn't matter. All I knew was that I was searching for a connection, something deeper than the usual small talk. That's when I stumbled upon her profile. Her smile was warm, and her bio was quirky enough to catch my attention. "Let's create a horror story together," it read. I chuckled at the cleverness of it, thinking it was just a playful way to attract attention. We matched almost instantly. As we delved into conversations that ranged from our favorite horror movies to our most irrational fears, I felt a spark that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was refreshing to find someone who could match my wit and banter. After a week of texting, we decided to meet up. She suggested a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop on the edge of town, far from the bustling main street. The place was dimly lit with a vintage vibe, filled with mismatched furniture and dark wood accents. The kind of place that smelled like roasted coffee beans and old books. When I arrived, I spotted her sitting in a corner, her eyes scanning the shelves of dusty novels. She looked just like her pictures, but somehow more captivating in person. We talked for hours, losing ourselves in conversation. It was as if we had known each other for years. She had this way of drawing me in, and I couldn't help but feel like I was in a movie, the kind where everything seems perfect until the credits roll, and the reality sets in. As the night wore on, the coffee shop emptied, and the shadows deepened. The barista began cleaning up, and I noticed a flicker of unease in the air. I felt a sudden chill, and it wasn't just the temperature. The way she looked at me, with those piercing eyes, made me question everything. Was there something more to her than met the eye? I brushed it off as paranoia. We exchanged numbers, and as I left, her gaze lingered on me a moment too long. The next few days were a whirlwind of texts and late-night conversations, but there was something about her that began to gnaw at the back of my mind. She would often mention her love for the macabre, her fascination with the darker aspects of life. I found it intriguing at first, but as she shared stories of people who had vanished, of urban legends that sent chills down my spine, it became increasingly unsettling. One evening, she invited me to her place for a movie night. I hesitated, my instincts whispering warnings, but curiosity got the better of me. Her apartment was just as eccentric as she was, filled with odd decorations, vintage horror movie posters, and a bookshelf overflowing with Gothic novels. The atmosphere was thick with an odd mix of incense and something else, something that felt almost alive. We settled in for a marathon of classic horror films. As the night unfolded, I found myself getting lost in the flickering images on the screen. But she was different. She seemed more absorbed in my reactions than in the films themselves, her eyes gleaming with a strange light whenever a jump scare occurred. It was mesmerizing and disconcerting all at once. I could feel the tension building in the air, wrapping around us like a thick fog. As the clock ticked deeper into the night, I felt a growing sense of unease. I was beginning to notice odd details about her apartment, the way the shadows moved, the strange markings on the walls, and the way her laughter echoed, just a little too loud. It was as if the space itself was alive, watching me, waiting for something to unfold. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. Then she suggested we watch a documentary about unsolved disappearances. My heart raced at the thought. It felt too real, too close to home. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back as the stories unfolded on screen. Each tale felt like a warning, a reminder that sometimes the things we think we know can turn out to be horrifyingly different. The documentary ended, and the room fell silent. Her eyes were locked onto mine, and the atmosphere shifted. It was no longer playful. It felt heavy with anticipation. I could hear the clock ticking, each second echoing like a heartbeat. Just then, she stood up, walked to the dimly lit kitchen, and returned with a small, ornate box. She opened it slowly, revealing what appeared to be a collection of trinkets, a lock of hair, a faded photograph, and something that looked like a tiny bone. I felt my stomach drop as she explained that these were mementos from her friends. Friends who had moved on in a sense. My heart raced, and I could feel the panic rising within me. I tried to laugh it off, but the nervous chuckle caught in my throat. It was becoming clear that this was no ordinary date. The tension was palpable, wrapping around me like a vice. I needed to leave, but something held me there, a morbid curiosity mixed with fear. I watched her as she caressed the items, her eyes sparkling with a twisted delight. Suddenly, she turned to me, a grin spreading across her face. "Do you want to be my next friend?" The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My heart raced as I stood frozen, the realization dawning on me that perhaps her fascination with horror wasn't just a phase. I made a desperate excuse to leave, scrambling to gather my things. As I backed away, she laughed lightly, but there was an edge to it, something dark and sinister. I hurried out of the apartment, my pulse pounding in my ears. I could feel her eyes on me, tracking my every move as I fled into the night. The cool air hit my face, grounding me as I stumbled down the street, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. But as I reached my car, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It was just a bad date, I told myself. Just a wild imagination playing tricks. But the relief was short-lived. As I drove home, I began to receive notifications on my phone, messages from her. At first, they were harmless, just playful jokes about our movie night. But then they turned darker. They became increasingly erratic, filled with cryptic references to the items in the box and how she couldn't wait to keep me close. The pit in my stomach grew heavier with each message. My heart raced as I arrived home, locking the door behind me. I tried to shake it off, but sleep eluded me. I kept replaying the night in my head, the way her eyes glinted with something sinister. Days turned into weeks, and her messages continued. They became a constant reminder of that night, a dark shadow looming over me. I felt like a character in one of those horror movies, trapped in a narrative I couldn't escape. I began to avoid social situations, paranoid that she might show up. Then one night, exhausted and worn down, I decided to finally confront my fears. I took a deep breath and opened my messaging app, ready to block her number for good. But before I could do that, a new message popped up. It was a picture, a snapshot of my front door, taken just moments ago. My breath caught in my throat. I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. I felt the walls closing in around me, the realization crashing over me like a wave. I was not just a character in a horror story. I was living in one, and she was the author. I never thought I'd find myself swiping through a dating app in the dead of night, but here I was, lying in bed, half awake and half bored. It was one of those nights when nothing good was on TV, and my friends were all busy with their own lives. I had just moved to a new city, and the loneliness crept in like a thick fog. So I downloaded this app called Hinge, thinking it would be a fun distraction. The idea was simple: find someone interesting, chat a bit, and maybe meet up. Easy, right? I started scrolling, my thumb flicking up and down the screen, judging people based on blurry photos and one-liners. Most of it felt remarkably superficial, but then I stumbled upon her profile. Her name was Emma, and there was something about her that caught my eye. She had this mysterious vibe, a hint of darkness in her smile that made my heart race, just a little. Her prompts were intriguing too, one of which read, "What's your biggest fear?" To that, she had replied, "Being alone in a room full of people." I felt a sudden connection to those words, the kind of connection that made me want to reach out and know more. I liked her photo, sent a message, and waited. The next day, I woke up to a notification. Emma had responded. We chatted back and forth, and before I knew it, we were swapping secrets and fears. She told me about her love for horror movies and how she used to sneak into the local theater as a kid. I shared my own tales of late-night ghost stories told around campfires. There was a spark, an electric thrill that came with our exchanges. I felt like I was unraveling a mystery, and the more I learned about her, the deeper I wanted to dive. After a week of chatting, we finally decided to meet up. Emma suggested a quaint little cafe tucked away in a neighborhood that felt almost forgotten. The kind of place where the walls were plastered with vintage posters, the air was thick with the smell of coffee, and the lighting was dim enough to give everything a warm, inviting glow. I arrived early, my heart racing with anticipation and a hint of anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point, a moment that could change everything. When she walked in, I felt a rush of excitement. Emma wore a long black coat that flowed behind her like a shadow. Her hair framed her face, accentuating her striking features. I could tell she had a unique style, something that set her apart from everyone else. She was even more captivating in person. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing effortlessly. But there was an underlying tension, a sense of something lurking just beneath the surface. As we drank our coffees, I noticed a flicker of fear in her eyes every time the door opened. Each new customer brought a wave of anxiety that washed over her, and I couldn't help but feel it too. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just her quirky nature. But then, as we delved deeper into our conversation, she mentioned her fascination with true crime stories and the darkness of human nature. I found myself captivated but also unnerved by her intensity. After a couple of hours, we decided to take a walk. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The atmosphere shifted. The quaint charm of the cafe faded away as we wandered into a quieter part of town. The streetlights flickered ominously, illuminating the path ahead in eerie bursts. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I brushed it aside, trying to focus on the woman walking beside me. Emma's laughter rang out, but it felt hollow, echoing off the buildings like a ghostly whisper. She paused in front of an old, abandoned house, its windows boarded up and its paint peeling away. "This place has a story," she said, her eyes glinting with excitement. "They say it's haunted." I chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but a knot formed in my stomach. She stepped closer to the house. Her curiosity piqued. Something in her demeanor shifted, the thrill of the unknown sparking a fire in her eyes. I felt a pull, a desire to follow her deeper into the darkness, even as my instincts screamed for me to turn back. There was something magnetic about her, something that compelled me to take risks I wouldn't normally consider. As we approached the house, I noticed how the air grew colder, the atmosphere thickening with an unshakable tension. Emma reached for the doorknob, and I grabbed her wrist, a sudden wave of panic washing over me. "Maybe we shouldn't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But she shook her head, her determination unwavering. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. I hesitated at the threshold, my heart pounding in my chest. Emma stepped inside, her silhouette disappearing into the shadows. I reluctantly followed, the darkness swallowing us whole. The air was stale, filled with the scent of decay and desperation. As we ventured deeper, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruding, that we weren't supposed to be there. The house seemed to breathe around us, the walls whispering secrets of lives once lived. Emma wandered ahead, her bright eyes scanning the room, while I lagged behind, unease curling in my gut. We stumbled upon old photographs, dusty furniture, remnants of a life that had long since vanished. Each creak of the floorboards sent jolts of terror through me, but Emma seemed unfazed, her curiosity driving her forward. Suddenly, she stopped in front of a large mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. I could see her reflection staring back, but mine was absent. I felt a chill run down my spine. Emma reached out to touch the glass, and I grabbed her arm, fear gripping my heart. "We should go," I urged, my voice trembling. But she turned to me, a wild look in her eyes. "Don't you see? This is where the stories live," she said, her voice low and intense. I could sense the shift in her energy, an unsettling transformation that sent a jolt of dread through me. "They're all around us." Before I could respond, the lights flickered, and a loud crash echoed from somewhere deep within the house. Panic surged through me, and I pulled Emma back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But she stood there, entranced, a smile creeping across her face. It was a smile that didn't belong to her, a smile that chilled me to the bone. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind us, the sound reverberating through the empty halls. My heart raced as I pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. I turned back to Emma, who was now staring at the mirror with a strange intensity, as if it held the answers to questions I didn't want to ask. The reflection shifted, and for a moment, I thought I saw another figure standing behind her, a shadowy presence that seemed to reach out toward her. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the two of us in the dim light. Emma turned slowly, her eyes wide and unblinking. "They want to play," she whispered, her voice a haunting melody that echoed in the silence. My heart raced. I had to get out of there. I rushed to the window, desperate to escape this nightmare, but it was barred shut. I turned back to Emma, fear clawing at my throat. "We need to leave now." But she just smiled, that same twisted smile that filled me with dread. In that moment, everything shifted. I realized with a sinking feeling that Emma wasn't just playing at being mysterious. She was something else entirely. The fear I had felt earlier morphed into a primal instinct to survive. I backed away, my mind racing, trying to figure out how to escape this madness. But it was too late. The house groaned around us, the air thickening as shadows stretched and twisted. I could feel the darkness closing in, the whispers rising to a cacophony, drowning out my thoughts. Emma stepped closer to the mirror, her reflection flickering like an old film reel. I could feel her drawing me in, the pull of her energy both intoxicating and terrifying. In one final desperate act, I lunged for the door, pounding on it with all my might. But it remained unyielding. I turned back to Emma, the realization washing over me like ice water. She was never just a girl on a dating app. She was a vessel, a conduit for something dark and ancient, and I had walked right into her trap. As the shadows enveloped me, I screamed, but the sound was swallowed whole by the darkness. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of unseen eyes watching from every corner. Emma turned to me one last time, and for a brief moment, I saw the girl I had been drawn to, the girl I had thought I knew. But then the darkness consumed her, and I was left alone in a house filled with stories that would never be told. I had never been one to dive into the world of online dating, but after ending a long-term relationship, my friends convinced me to try out Hinge. They promised me it was different, more genuine, and that I'd find someone who truly matched my vibe. Skeptical but curious, I created a profile, hoping to find a nice distraction. The thrill of swiping through faces, reading bios, and matching with potential partners was strangely intoxicating. I was scrolling late one night when I came across a profile that made my heart race. His name was Adam, and his picture showed him exploring forests, hiking mountains, and enjoying life outdoors. The captions were witty, and he had this charm that felt magnetic. We matched, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. Initially, everything felt lighthearted and fun. We exchanged stories about our favorite hiking spots and shared playlists filled with indie music. Adam was adventurous, and I felt drawn to his passion for life. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice something unsettling. He had a tendency to ask very personal questions, like my childhood fears and my biggest regrets. At first, I thought he was just trying to get to know me better, but there was an intensity in his inquiries that made me uncomfortable. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. One evening, he suggested we meet at a remote cabin he had rented for the weekend. It sounded like a dream getaway, surrounded by nature with no distractions. I hesitated. My instincts were screaming at me to stay away, but the allure of adventure was hard to resist. After a day of debating, I finally agreed, telling myself that I could handle it. It was just a weekend in the woods, right? When I arrived at the cabin, it felt like stepping into a different world. Nestled deep in the forest, the air was crisp, and the only sound was the whisper of the wind through the trees. The cabin itself was rustic, with wooden beams and a large stone fireplace. Adam greeted me with a warm smile, and for a moment, all my worries faded away. He poured us some wine, and we settled in front of the fireplace, talking about everything and nothing. The flickering flames cast shadows on the walls, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt both cozy and eerie. As the night wore on, the conversation took a darker turn. Adam began to share stories about his childhood, filled with strange occurrences and nightmares that haunted him. I felt the tension build in the room. It was as if the walls were closing in. He talked about how he often felt watched, especially in the woods. I laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but the unease lingered. The more he spoke, the more I felt like I was peeling back layers of a person I barely knew. Later, as we moved to the porch, the darkness enveloped us. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy of trees, and the forest felt alive, pulsing with unseen energy. Adam sat close, our knees almost touching, and he looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race. He leaned in, whispering about how he believed the woods were filled with spirits, entities that could sense your fears and desires. I chuckled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to change the subject, but my mind was racing with thoughts of escape. The isolation of the cabin made me feel vulnerable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked into something I couldn't control. Just then, a rustling sound came from the trees, and I froze. Adam's expression changed. He sat up, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. He stood up, looking into the darkness, and I felt a surge of panic. This wasn't the adventure I had signed up for. It was turning into a nightmare. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him it was just the wind or some animal, but my instincts screamed that something was wrong. Adam walked towards the edge of the porch, peering into the shadows. I followed him, but the darkness felt suffocating, and I hung back, my heart pounding. "It's probably just a deer," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice shook. He turned to me, a strange smile creeping across his face. "Or maybe something else," he replied, his tone unsettling. Suddenly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a flashlight, shining it into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating branches and leaves, but revealing nothing more. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized how isolated we were. The cabin was miles away from the nearest town, and the thought of being stranded here with someone whose sanity felt questionable was terrifying. As the night dragged on, I tried to keep the conversation light, but my mind raced with thoughts of finding a way to leave. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, but the moment I stepped inside, I locked the door and took a deep breath. My hands trembled as I texted my friend, asking her to check in on me in the morning. I needed to find a way out of this situation. When I returned, Adam was sitting on the couch, his back to me, staring into the fireplace. I tried to play it cool, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "You okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond. I felt a rush of fear. Something inside me told me to leave. I moved cautiously toward the door, but just as I reached for the handle, he turned around, a strange look in his eyes. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. My heart raced as I realized I was trapped. I felt the walls closing in again, the air thickening with dread. In a moment of clarity, I made a decision. I had to escape. I dashed for the back door, but he was quicker, grabbing my wrist. "Don't you want to know the truth?" he asked, his grip tightening. My heart sank as he pulled me closer, the intensity in his eyes morphing into something dark and predatory. I struggled, adrenaline fueling my fight or flight response. I broke free and sprinted outside, the cold air hitting me like a splash of ice water. I ran into the woods, branches scratching at my arms, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear him behind me, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. Panic surged through me as I stumbled over roots and rocks, desperate to put distance between us. I could feel him closing in, his presence like a storm gathering around me. Then, just as I thought I couldn't run anymore, I tripped and fell, hitting the ground hard. I lay there, gasping for breath, the darkness surrounding me like a shroud. I could hear the sounds of the forest, a cacophony of night creatures, covering my frantic heartbeat. I glanced back, and to my shock, I saw him standing there, but he wasn't coming after me. He looked different, almost serene as he stared into the shadows. Suddenly, without warning, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Confused and terrified, I slowly got to my feet, not daring to breathe too loudly. I didn't understand what had just happened. I ran back toward the cabin, my instincts guiding me toward the safety of the light. But when I reached the door, it was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. I stepped inside, the remnants of warmth lingering in the air. The fireplace was still crackling, but Adam was gone. Panic surged again. I rushed to my phone, but there was no signal. I felt my heartbeat echoing in my ears as I searched the cabin, checking every corner, every shadow. Then I stumbled upon a journal lying on the coffee table. It was filled with scrawled notes, sketches of people with hollow eyes, and pages filled with erratic thoughts about the woods, spirits, and the darkness within. I froze as I flipped through the pages, my stomach churning. It was a diary of a mind unraveling, a descent into madness that had started long before I had ever met him. My mind raced with the chilling realization that he had been using me as a subject, a test for whatever twisted theories he had about fear and survival. Just then, I heard a sound behind me, a soft whisper, a rustle. I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his eyes glinting with a manic light. "You wanted to know the truth, didn't you?" he said, a smile creeping across his face. And in that moment I understood. I was never meant to leave. The woods were his sanctuary, and I was merely another chapter in his twisted narrative. The darkness had claimed him long ago, and now it was ready to claim me too. I should have listened to my gut when I first saw his profile. The pictures were perfect, the bio charming, and just the right amount of quirky. He had that rugged look, the kind that made you think he could easily be the lead in some indie flick. I swiped right without a second thought, caught up in the thrill of the hunt. The city was buzzing with excitement about the latest dating app, and I was ready to dive headfirst into the chaos of modern love. We matched almost instantly. His messages were playful, filled with inside jokes that felt like they were made just for me. It was intoxicating, the way he seemed to see right through me, understanding every little quirk and flaw. We chatted for days, sharing memes, discussing our favorite movies, and laughing at our mutual love for overpriced coffee. He suggested we meet up at a small cafe on the edge of town, one that was known for its dim lighting and cozy ambience. The moment I walked in, I felt an electric charge in the air, the kind that buzzes when something significant is about to happen. The cafe had that vintage vibe, with mismatched furniture and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. It smelled like fresh pastries and coffee, a warm embrace that made you want to linger. But as I settled into my seat, waiting for him to arrive, a strange feeling crept up my spine. It was as if the air had thickened, and the chatter of other customers faded into a muffled hum. I shook it off. Nerves were part of the game. When he walked in, my heart skipped a beat. He was just as handsome in person, with a confident stride that radiated charm. He spotted me immediately and flashed a smile that made me forget all my worries. We talked easily, the conversation flowing like we were old friends. But somewhere in the back of my mind, that unsettling feeling lingered. The more we talked, the more I noticed little things that didn't quite add up. He seemed overly interested in my personal life, asking questions that felt intrusive rather than curious. It was as if he was trying to piece together a puzzle, and I was the missing piece. I brushed it off as the excitement of a first date, convincing myself it was just nerves on both sides. As the night wore on, the cafe began to empty out. The lights dimmed further, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I could hear the occasional clatter of dishes being washed in the back, the sound echoing in the stillness. My gut tightened as I realized we were the last ones there, the staff subtly hinting it was time to close up. He offered to walk me home, and despite my reservations, I agreed. The streets were quiet, the moonlight spilling across the pavement like a silvery blanket. As we walked, the conversation took on a darker tone. He began sharing stories of his past, tales that seemed too outrageous to be true. He spoke of betrayal, of people who had wronged him, and I could feel the tension in the air shift. It was as if he was trying to gauge my reaction, to see how far he could push the boundaries of my comfort. When we reached my apartment, I hesitated at the door. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, intense and searching. There was something almost predatory about the way he stood there, the way he leaned in a little too close. I forced a smile, thanked him for the evening, and turned to unlock the door. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, letting out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. But that feeling of safety was short-lived. My phone buzzed almost instantly, and when I checked it, my heart dropped. It was a message from him, but it wasn't just as simple, "I had a great time." Instead, it was a photo of my apartment building taken from across the street, the shadows obscuring the details, but unmistakably my home. Panic surged through me, and I felt my pulse quicken. I rushed to the window, peering through the blinds to see if anyone was lurking outside. The street was empty, with only the streetlights casting an eerie glow on the pavement. I could feel the chill of dread creeping back in, but I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was just being playful, trying to show he was interested. I decided to ignore him, turning off my phone and trying to distract myself with TV. But every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, made my skin crawl. The air felt thick with anxiety, and sleep was impossible. I kept checking the time, convinced that I would feel safe once morning light broke through the darkness. The next day, I woke up groggy and disoriented. I had barely slept, and the sunlight streaming through the window felt foreign. I picked up my phone, half expecting another message from him, but there was nothing. I felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Maybe it was all just a bad first date, something to laugh about later with friends. As the day dragged on, I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to him. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, lurking just out of sight. I decided to go for a walk, hoping that some fresh air would clear my head. I strolled through the park, taking in the sights and sounds of life around me. Families were out enjoying the sunshine, couples were laughing, and kids were playing. But as I rounded a corner, I froze. There he was, sitting on a bench, casually scrolling through his phone as if he had no idea I was there. My heart raced, and I felt an overwhelming urge to turn and run. Instead, I stood frozen, my mind racing. Had he followed me? Was this all part of some sick game? I took a deep breath and turned to leave, but the moment I did, I heard his voice calling my name. It was a low, calm tone that sent a shiver down my spine. I quickened my pace, heart pounding in my chest, and didn't look back. When I got home, I locked the door and sank to the floor, tears of frustration and fear streaming down my face. I felt trapped, the walls closing in around me. That's when my phone buzzed again. I was almost afraid to look, but curiosity got the better of me. This time, it was a video. I pressed play, and my blood ran cold as I realized it was footage from my apartment. The camera panned slowly, showing every corner of my living room. He had been in my space, watching me without me knowing. I could barely breathe as I fumbled for my phone, ready to call the police. But then something caught my eye. In the corner of the video, just briefly, I saw a familiar face. It was me, sitting at my desk, completely unaware. The realization hit me like a freight train. He wasn't the one watching me. I was the one being watched by someone else. In a panic, I rushed to my window and threw open the blinds. The street was empty again, but I could feel the weight of eyes on me. I stumbled back, feeling my heart race as I realized I was caught in a web I couldn't escape. I had been led into a trap, a game of cat and mouse where I was the mouse, and the hunter was closer than I could ever imagine. And then, as the realization sunk in, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a simple message from him. "You'll never get away." I never thought I'd find myself scrolling through a dating app while sitting in my parents' basement, but here I was. It's not like I had a lot of options. My friends were all busy with their lives, and let's be real, the thought of meeting someone in person was terrifying. So, I downloaded this app called Hinge, thinking it'd be a fun way to kill time. The profiles were a mixed bag, but there was one that caught my eye. Her name was Emily, and her pictures radiated a quirky charm that felt oddly familiar, like a character you'd see in a movie. I swiped right, half expecting nothing to happen, but to my surprise, she matched with me almost instantly. We started chatting, and it was effortless. Emily had this way of making the mundane seem exciting, and soon we had plans to meet up. She suggested a small cafe tucked away in a corner of the city, one that I'd never heard of before, but was curious to try. I could feel the butterflies fluttering in my stomach, not just from the anticipation of meeting her, but also from the eerie sense of something lingering beneath the surface. The cafe, she warned, had a reputation for being quirky, almost unnerving. It was decorated with vintage memorabilia, but there was something unsettling about it, like it was frozen in time. The day arrived, and I put on my best outfit, trying to mask the creeping anxiety bubbling inside me. As I made my way to the cafe, the streets felt darker than usual, the air thick with an unshakable tension. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just nerves. When I finally stepped inside, the dim lighting and eclectic decor greeted me like an old friend. I felt the weight of 100 eyes on me, though I couldn't see anyone. It was just us, the barista, and the soft hum of distant conversation. I spotted Emily sitting at a corner table, her bright smile cutting through the gloom. She looked even more enchanting in person, her hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall. We exchanged pleasantries, and the conversation flowed naturally, but there was an underlying current I couldn't quite identify. Every time I looked into her eyes, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, like I was meant to be here, but had somehow wandered into the wrong story. As we talked, I noticed something odd about the cafe. The walls seemed to close in on us, and the sounds from the outside world faded away, leaving only the echo of our laughter. I felt an inexplicable urge to leave, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. When Emily suggested we explore the nearby park after our coffee, I hesitated but ultimately agreed. We walked side by side, our conversation drifting effortlessly. The park was eerily quiet, and as we strolled along the winding path, the trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels. The shadows grew longer, and a chill crept through the air. Emily seemed unfazed, her laughter ringing out, but I felt an unsettling presence lurking just beyond my peripheral vision. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching us, but there was nothing. We reached a secluded area of the park, where an old gazebo stood, almost hidden beneath the overgrown vines. It was picturesque, but the atmosphere was thick with an unshakable dread. Emily suggested we sit for a moment, and against my better judgment, I followed her lead. As we settled into the worn-out benches, I couldn't help but notice how the light seemed to dim around us, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the fading sunlight. That's when I noticed the first sign of something being off. Emily pulled out her phone to check the time, and I caught a glimpse of her screen. It was filled with notifications, but they were all from a single contact. The name didn't register at first, but as she scrolled, I felt my heart race. The messages were bizarre, filled with cryptic phrases and unsettling emojis that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably just a joke or some inside joke I wasn't privy to. Yet, the unease lingered. I attempted to steer the conversation onto safer ground, but Emily seemed distracted, her eyes flickering toward the trees as if she sensed something I couldn't. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and carrying an eerie whisper through the air. I shivered, feeling as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to fray. Emily leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, sharing an odd story about the park. She spoke of a legend, a tale of a spirit that roamed the grounds, searching for something lost. I laughed it off, but she seemed so earnest, her eyes glinting with an intensity that sent a jolt through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was sharing more than just a ghost story. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in twilight, and I felt a sense of urgency rising within me. I suggested we head back, but Emily's grip on my arm tightened. She insisted we stay a little longer, her eyes pleading, almost desperate. Against my better judgment, I stayed, but the atmosphere thickened, and the shadows deepened around us. Then, everything took a turn. I heard a rustling behind us, and my heart dropped. I spun around, expecting to see someone lurking in the darkness, but there was nothing, just the trees swaying in the wind. Yet, I could feel it, a presence, something watching us. Emily's expression shifted. She looked both terrified and exhilarated, as if she thrived on the fear I was trying to suppress. Panic surged within me, and I tried to get up, but her grip tightened once more. I could see the glint of something sharp in her hand. It was a small, ornate dagger, its blade catching the last remnants of light. The unease morphed into full-blown terror as I realized I was trapped. She wasn't just quirky, she was unstable. In that moment, everything clicked. I thought of the messages, the way she had been so eager to share her stories. The spirit, the lost thing. It was never about the park. It was about me. I had walked right into her trap, lured in by her charm and charisma. The cafe, the park, it had all been a setup. As I struggled to break free, her expression shifted again, a mix of excitement and something more sinister. I had to act fast. I twisted away, finally breaking her grip, and bolted into the darkness. The park transformed into a maze of trees and shadows, the path blurring in my panic. I could hear her footsteps behind me, the sound echoing in the stillness. I sprinted toward the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the weight of her presence closing in, the world around me warping as I raced to escape. Just as I reached the edge of the park, I turned back for one last look, and what I saw froze me in place. Emily stood in the shadows, the dagger gleaming in her hand. But it wasn't just her expression that struck me. It was the way the darkness seemed to cling to her, twisting and writhing like a living thing. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat as I realized the truth. She wasn't just a person. I had stepped into a horror story, one where I was the unwitting protagonist. The moment shattered as the world around me warped again. I ran, the path stretching endlessly before me, the trees whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I barely made it out of the park, the weight of dread pressing down on me. But I knew I had escaped something far worse than a bad date. I had escaped a nightmare that was all too real, leaving me to question how I had ever thought this would end any other way. I was scrolling through my dating app one night, just another Friday spent in my tiny apartment, the glow of my phone illuminating the dark corners of the room. My friends had insisted I give it a try, convinced I'd find someone who could actually hold a conversation. So there I was, swiping left and right, more out of boredom than genuine hope. Then, I stumbled upon his profile. His name was Ethan, and he looked like the kind of guy who could charm the socks off anyone. A casual smile, tousled hair, and a love for the outdoors. His bio mentioned hiking and photography, two things I was into as well. I felt a little spark of excitement, and before I knew it, I was swiping right. A match. The notification buzzed, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. We started chatting, and his messages were witty and engaging. He had a knack for making even the mundane feel thrilling, like he was weaving a story with every text. I was hooked. We talked for hours that night, losing track of time as the conversation flowed effortlessly. I could almost forget the creeping loneliness that usually settled in on weekends. As the days passed, our chats turned into late-night phone calls. We shared our dreams and fears, little snippets of our lives that felt like tiny pieces of a puzzle fitting together. I didn't think much about it, but the more I shared, the more I felt a strange kind of intimacy develop, as if I were revealing parts of myself I hadn't shown anyone in a long time. Ethan seemed to understand me in a way that felt almost unsettling, like he could see right through me. We decided to meet up after a week of chatting. The plan was simple: coffee at a local cafe, followed by a hike at a nearby trail. I arrived early, nerves bubbling in my stomach. The cafe was quaint, filled with the scent of fresh ground coffee and baked goods, but I barely noticed. My mind was focused on the possibility of meeting this guy who had captivated me so completely. When he walked in, I felt an electric jolt, the kind you read about in romance novels, but think only exists in fiction. He looked even better in person, and I was struck by how his presence seemed to fill the room. The conversation flowed just as easily as it had over texts, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. After coffee, we headed to the trail. The forest was thick with trees, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. Sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. I felt alive, invigorated by the fresh air and the thrill of being with someone who seemed genuinely interested in me. But as we hiked deeper into the woods, I began to notice something unsettling. Ethan was asking questions that felt too personal, probing into parts of my past I had kept buried. Why did I break up with my last boyfriend? What did I fear most? I brushed it off as curiosity, but a tiny voice in my head started whispering doubts. The atmosphere shifted as we ventured further from the trail. The trees loomed larger, their silhouettes darkening the path ahead. I felt the weight of the silence, punctuated only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Something about the way he looked at me made me feel exposed, as if he was dissecting my soul with every glance. The conversation took a darker turn. He spoke about his childhood, mentioning a family secret that had left him feeling disconnected from his loved ones. I could sense a deep sadness behind his words, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made me uneasy. I tried to shift the conversation back to lighter topics, but he seemed fixated, almost obsessed with my vulnerabilities. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but the laughter felt hollow. As we reached a clearing, I could see the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was beautiful, almost surreal, but my heart raced, and the feeling of dread deepened as I sensed that this moment was about more than just a picturesque view. Ethan stepped closer, his expression shifting. He was no longer the charming guy I'd met online. There was a darkness lurking behind his smile. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to be cautious. He reached for my hand, and in that moment, everything changed. A flicker of something dangerous flashed in his eyes. The charming facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of something I couldn't put my finger on, something unsettling. I pulled away, feeling a chill wash over me despite the warmth of the setting sun. I suggested we head back, trying to keep my voice steady. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. As we retraced our steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle in the bushes made my heart race. Ethan was quiet now, his demeanor shifting. I stole glances at him, trying to gauge what was going through his mind. The playful spark was gone, replaced by a brooding intensity that sent shivers down my spine. The path felt longer on the way back, as if the trees were closing in on us, the shadows growing darker. When we finally reached the cafe, I thought I was safe, but Ethan lingered outside. He insisted on walking me to my car, an insistence that felt less like concern and more like a need to dominate the situation. I felt trapped, and the walls of my mind closed in around me. As we neared my vehicle, I noticed something glinting in the fading light, a small object wedged between the tires. I bent down to get a closer look, my heart dropping as I realized it was a knife, its blade gleaming ominously. Ethan's voice broke the silence, low and menacing, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "You shouldn't have dug too deep," he said, his tone shifting again, revealing the mask he had worn all night. The friendly banter vanished, replaced by something dark and twisted. My instincts kicked in, and I turned to run. I sprinted towards the cafe, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The door slammed behind me, and I could hear him yelling something, but I didn't stop to listen. I glanced back through the glass, panic rising as I saw him standing there, a shadow among shadows, his expression unreadable. The barista noticed my distress and called the police, her voice steady as she reassured me that help was on the way. When the officers arrived, they found Ethan gone, leaving behind only the lingering sense of dread. They searched the area, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. I was left shaken, wondering how someone I had felt such a connection with could turn into a nightmare. It wasn't until later, days after the encounter, that I received a message from him, the screen lighting up with his name. I hesitated but opened it, my heart racing. It was a photo of me taken from a distance, blurry but unmistakably me. The caption read, "I'll always be watching." The thrill of dating had turned into a horror story, leaving me questioning every connection I made from that day forward. I've always been the kind of person who believed that online dating could lead to something real. My friends loved to tease me about my obsession with dating apps, but I took it seriously. After a series of disappointing dates, I decided to give Hinge a shot. The app's promise of designed to be deleted intrigued me. I wanted a connection, someone who could understand me. I crafted my profile carefully, choosing photos that displayed my adventurous spirit and witty side. I filled out my prompts, always looking for a way to spark conversation. I was ready. It all started when I matched with a guy named Max. His profile was a mix of humor and depth, something that immediately drew me in. The banter flowed easily between us, and before I knew it, we were exchanging messages late into the night. He had this weird knack for making me feel seen, like he could peer right into my soul. I could sense the chemistry building between us, and it felt electric. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet up in person. We agreed to meet at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. As I walked there, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. The streets were eerily quiet, almost as if the universe was holding its breath. I brushed it off as predate jitters. Surely, everything would be fine. When I finally got to the cafe, I spotted him right away. He was sitting at a corner table, a lopsided grin on his face, and my heart skipped a beat. Max was charming in person, just like he was online. We shared stories over steaming cups of coffee, laughing at the little quirks of life. The world outside faded into a blur as we got lost in each other's eyes. But somewhere deep inside, a nagging feeling began to creep up on me. It was subtle at first, like the hum of an old refrigerator, but I couldn't shake it. I brushed it off, deciding to focus on the moment. As the evening wore on, the cafe started to empty. The soft jazz playing in the background became our only witness. Max leaned closer, and I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He started to share a bit more about his life, and that's when things took a turn. He spoke of his childhood, mentioning vague details about a difficult upbringing. There was a darkness behind his eyes that I hadn't noticed before, a flicker that sent a chill down my spine. I found myself getting drawn into his stories, but something felt off. He spoke about past relationships, how they had all ended tragically, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach. I tried to push it aside, reminding myself that everyone has baggage, but as he continued to share, it felt like he was weaving a web around me, pulling me deeper into his narrative. When he suggested we go for a walk after the cafe closed, I hesitated. The streetlights flickered on as twilight settled in, casting long shadows that danced on the pavement. But something in his eyes convinced me to say yes. Maybe it was the allure of adventure, or perhaps the thrill of the unknown. As we strolled through the dimly lit streets, the atmosphere shifted. The quaint neighborhood transformed into something more sinister. Max led me down an alley, and my heart raced. It was darker here, the walls closing in as if the world had shrunk. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, but felt oddly isolated. I tried to shake off the unease, reminding myself that I was with someone I had a connection with. But with each step, I felt a growing sense of foreboding. He began to talk about his passion for photography, pulling out his phone to show me some images he'd taken. His photos were hauntingly beautiful, yet they captured a rawness that unsettled me. I could see abandoned buildings, empty streets, and eerie landscapes. The images tugged at something inside me, leaving me unsettled. Max's intensity was intoxicating, but it was also overwhelming. He seemed to be searching for something in my reaction to his art, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being evaluated. I laughed at his jokes, but my laughter felt hollow. My instinct screamed that I should turn back. As we continued down the alley, I noticed a door slightly ajar at the end. It was an old, worn-out building, a remnant of something that used to be vibrant. Max's eyes lit up with excitement. He wanted to explore it, and against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. The door creaked as we stepped inside, and the air turned stale. The faint smell of mildew filled my nostrils. My heart pounded in my chest as we walked deeper into the building. The walls were peeling, and the light from my phone cast eerie shadows. Max snapped pictures as we wandered through the dimly lit rooms, each one more desolate than the last. But then something shifted. I felt it before I saw it, a presence lurking in the corner of my mind. I turned to Max, whose expression had transformed. The charming demeanor was gone, replaced by something darker. He was focused on the shadows, almost as if he were waiting for something to emerge. I stepped back, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. I made an excuse about needing to go home, but he laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign now. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Max began to talk about his passion for capturing emotions, how he believed there was beauty in pain. My heart raced as I realized he wasn't just talking about photography anymore. He was revealing a side of himself that felt predatory, as if he was waiting for me to break. Panic surged through me, and I turned to leave, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere. But the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing in the hollow building. I could hear my heart beat in my ears as I looked back at him. His expression had shifted again. The manic glint in his eyes terrified me. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making. I darted towards a window, but it was boarded up. The panic set in, and I could feel the walls closing in, much like the stories he had shared. Max moved closer, his voice now low and intense. He spoke of the art of capturing the moment just before despair, how it was the rawest form of truth. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just a man with a passion for photography. He was someone who thrived on the fear and vulnerability of others. I felt the weight of my choices slamming down on me, the realization that I had ignored my instincts. With adrenaline coursing through me, I remembered the door. I rushed back, slamming my body against it, but it wouldn't budge. Max stood behind me, a twisted smile creeping across his face. I felt my breath hitch, the cold sweat trickling down my back. And then something clicked in my mind. I turned to face him, my voice steady despite the chaos. I spoke of the strength I felt in vulnerability, how it wasn't something to exploit, but to understand. For a split second, his expression faltered, and I seized the opportunity. I lunged for the door again, and this time, I felt it give way. I burst through the door, stumbling out into the cool night air. The streetlights flickered, but I could see the way home was clear. I didn't look back. I ran, feeling the weight of horror lift with each step away from that building, away from him. In the following days, I tried to rationalize what had happened. I told myself I was safe now, but the shadows lingered. Whenever I opened Hinge, I felt a knot in my stomach. I thought of Max, of the darkness that seemed to seep through his charming facade. Weeks later, I received a notification. Max liked your profile. My heart stopped. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had deleted the app, had sworn off dating altogether, but there it was, reminder of that night. I didn't need to open it. I could feel the chill creeping back down my spine. I had escaped that night, but I knew the darkness wasn't gone. It was out there, lurking, waiting for me to let my guard down again. And somewhere, in the shadows, Max was watching. I'm not going to lie, I was pretty desperate at that point. My friends had been pushing me to try out this dating app. They called it the Hinge of Horror because of how many crazy stories came out of it. But hey, I was single and bored, scrolling through the same boring TikToks every night. So I figured why not? Maybe I'd meet someone fun, or at least get a good story out of it. Setting up my profile was a whole ordeal. I had to find the right pictures, the ones that made me look cool, but not too desperate. I ended up using a pic from last summer at the beach with my friends, a goofy one of me trying to catch a cat, and one where I was just chilling at my favorite coffee shop. I filled out the prompts with my humor and a little sprinkle of authenticity. Nothing too serious, just enough to seem interesting. I hit submit and waited. It didn't take long before I started getting matches. Most of them were pretty standard, the usual small talk about favorite movies and music. But then, I matched with a guy named Jake. His profile was different, dark and intriguing. He had a mysterious vibe, with a few artsy black and white photos that made him look like he'd just walked off a film set. His prompts were a little odd, but in a way that piqued my interest. One read, "I like exploring the unknown." The other, "Every door hides a story." I was immediately drawn in, like a moth to a flame. We started chatting, and it was kind of intense. He had this way of asking questions that made me feel like he was peeling back layers of my brain. He didn't want to know my favorite ice cream flavor. He wanted to know about my fears, my dreams, things I hadn't shared with anyone before. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. He told me he was into urban exploration, which sounded cool until he mentioned some abandoned places he'd been. There was something in the way he described them that sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't help but lean into it. He was captivating. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet up. I hesitated at first. There was something about him that felt off, like he was too good at getting into my head. But curiosity got the best of me, along with the thrill of the unknown that he kept talking about. We agreed to meet at an old, run-down diner on the outskirts of town. It was one of those places you'd only see in horror movies, neon lights flickering, empty parking lot, and an air of mystery that hung like fog. When I arrived, the diner looked even creepier in person. The sign was barely lit, and the windows were grimy, making it hard to see inside. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I pushed through. I walked in and was greeted by a stale smell of grease mixed with something else, something that felt a little like fear. I spotted Jake in a booth in the back, his face half hidden in shadow. He looked up when I approached, and a smile spread across his face. It was a bit unnerving, but I couldn't deny that he was attractive. We ordered coffee and chatted about everything and nothing. He had a way of drawing me in, his eyes intense as he spoke about his adventures. But the more he talked, the more I felt like he was staring into my soul, unearthing my secrets. I tried to keep it light, but he kept steering the conversation into darker territories. He mentioned a place he explored recently, an abandoned mental hospital. The way he described it felt more like a twisted fantasy than reality. A part of me wanted to run, but another part was fascinated. As the night went on, the diner started to empty out. The waitress, an older woman with weary eyes, kept casting glances our way, like she sensed something was off. I felt the tension in the air, thick and electric. Jake leaned in closer, and I could feel his breath, warm and oddly inviting. He whispered about the thrill of exploring places where others feared to tread, about how every door he opened felt like stepping into another world. It was both thrilling and unsettling, but I was too wrapped up in the moment to think clearly. Just as I was about to ask him to lighten up a bit, he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His eyes flickered towards a window, narrowing as if he saw something outside that I couldn't. The atmosphere shifted. The shadows in the diner felt deeper, the world outside darker. My heart raced as I followed his gaze, but there was nothing there. Just the empty street, dimly lit by the flickering neon sign. Jake's demeanor changed. He looked almost hungry, like a predator that had just spotted its prey. I felt my pulse quicken, and I instinctively pulled back. He must have sensed it because he quickly leaned back, laughing it off as a joke about how the diner was haunted. But the laughter didn't reach his eyes. The unease settled in my stomach like a stone. When I finally decided to leave, the air felt heavier. I grabbed my coat and stood up, but Jake didn't get up right away. He just watched me, that same intense gaze boring into me. I felt like I was being weighed and measured. I made my way to the door, but as I turned back to look at him one last time, I caught a glimpse of something on his face, a flicker of something dark, something that made my skin prickle. I walked out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. I hurried to my car, glancing over my shoulder. The diner looked like a scene from a horror movie, lights flickering, shadows stretching. I fumbled with my keys, and as I finally got the door open, I felt a rush of relief. But it was short-lived. Just as I was about to drive away, I saw Jake standing at the entrance, his silhouette framed by the light of the diner. He was staring right at me, that same unsettling smile plastered on his face. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, calculating. I tore my gaze away and sped off, heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was just nerves, that I was overreacting. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something dark and twisted. The night felt heavy, pressing down on me like a weight, and the shadows on the road seemed to dance as I drove. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me, heart racing as I leaned against it, trying to calm myself. But just as I thought I was safe, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake. "You shouldn't have left so soon. You know every door hides a story, right? You just missed the best one." I stared at the screen, terror washing over me as the realization hit. I wasn't the one exploring the unknown. I was just another story waiting to be told.